I just don't know why I got this figure. I really don't. But I'm glad I did. Hey everyone, Dark Spider David here with what I could probably consider my first standalone McFarlane toy review, because up until this point I've been doing all these kind of paired off because I've been doing comparisons with a DC Collectibles counterpart or something that was property-wise related, like the Deathstroke and Arkham Origins Batman one, but this time there's no real correlation with other McFarlane figures that I have with this little guy right here. So he's gonna have his own video. He's gonna have to stand on his own this time. And I feel like he does the adequate job. This is for the McFarlane Toys Batman from Detective Comics number 1000, which premiered back in 2019 amongst the comics line. And here's the thing. I don't really read too many comics, or almost any comics. I really cannot remember the last time I read a comic for any property whatsoever, but I am familiar with current storylines, things that are going on and about, so I do know that this is kind of like its own thing happening within Detective Comics. All I know is that the aesthetic and the actual design choices behind this particular Batman remind me an awful lot of New 52 Batman without it actually being New 52, and I do know that and I respect that. So they're going for a much more simplistic looking Batman. You know, he has the traditional archetypal things that you would expect a Batman design to have, from the cowl to the bat to the oversized bat symbol and the yellow utility belt. But also, speaking of yellow, the color scheme. You have the traditional black on gray and nothing really else aesthetically different or just anything that's kind of evolved from prior versions of Batman. And McFarlane respectfully gave us a figure that was very similar in that respect, where you have basically a very simple color palette, nothing really crazy or anything to stand out, but at least everything is done adequately to quality in terms of actually maintaining the paint and the sculpt and everything else intact. As you can see, like I said, the oversized bat symbol is looking actually pretty decent there on his chest, and going down onto the utility belt, the crotch shot that I always like to do. Utility belt is pretty standard, but again, he feels robust. It feels like premium quality that you expect McFarlane to give us. And then working our way here through some of the different features of the figure aesthetically, you'll notice that similar to past McFarlanes that I've covered, you have the quote-unquote underwear piece that's actually separated to kind of clean up a little bit of the divisions here with the joints and making everything else feel very seamless and being able to kind of preserve the illusion of one unified costume piece. So that's pretty dope. You have the gloves as well as the boots here, very reminiscent of old school Batman with the little kind of pointy parts here, as well as the gauntlets and the claws here on the gauntlets. Mine unfortunately came with a slightly warped gauntlet here on his right forearm, so that's a little bit of a bummer. But then kind of working our way towards the torso area, I noticed a little feature that did call to my attention that I thought was kind of neat. Despite having a very clean matte finish around most of the costume, predominantly in the chest and the leg area, you actually have a strip here down on his side, mainly on his oblique and then the side of his leg, that has like a little bit of a graded texture to it. It's meant to be more like an armor type of padding, and it comes across really well. They did a good job at the sculpting, and it just complements the straightforward matte finish over here on the front of the costume. So I thought that was a nice little touch. And then going over to the back here, you have a very stylized cape like we've seen before with the Arkham Asylum Batman that I really do appreciate. I really like the overall look. A little rigid, a little difficult to take out of the packaging, and also a little difficult to cause a little bit of mobility here in the shoulders. In fact, sometimes the cape could cause a little bit of a detriment to the movement of the shoulders because of how rigid the cape is. It's good for posing, it's good for visual aesthetic, but also it does have its little qualms. Then we move on to the cowl that's reminding me an awful lot of the Brave and the Bold Batman, and I know it's not the exact same inspiration, but it just kind of reminds me a little bit with the very narrow white eyes as well as the scowl across his mouth there and his jowl. So overall, very straightforward Batman, but I really do like the overall sculpt and kind of overall vibe I'm getting with the figure. And since we touched on a little bit of the mobility with the shoulders because of how rigid these pieces of the cape are, we might as well talk about posability at this point. Of course, being a McFarlane figure, it prides itself with that 22-point articulation set, and there's nothing much going on differently here. I mean, it's very robust, it's very rigid, and also ratcheted in some parts. Strangely enough, my favorite point of articulation right out of the package is actually his head. His head has the traditional joint that allows 360-degree movement as well as slight movement up and down, as you see like so. However, and this is very difficult to articulate in video format, but the actual movement, I don't know what they did with the adhesive or the joints themselves in terms of sculpting. I don't know if there's a particular technique that they used to make this happen, but moving the head is oh so satisfying. It's really, really satisfying in the sense that it just feels very tight, but not too tight, if that makes any sense. There's a smoothness to it and also a very stiffness to it that feels very premium. I don't know what it is, but moving the head is probably the most satisfying movement or form of articulation I've had in a not only McFarlane figure, but rather any recent figures that I've purchased in recent memory. And that's coming out of the most unlikely figure that I almost wasn't even planning on getting at one point. So that's kind of crazy. But then moving to the shoulders, unfortunately, I can blatantly see that those joints from before with like Arkham Asylum Batman, Arkham Knight Batman, and a couple of others, those separated joints where you have not only the ball joint for the shoulder, but even this extra joint inside of the shoulder that's supposed to allow more mobility for the arm flexing outwards and inwards, is kind of goes in vain a little bit because of how rigid this cape is. So movement outwards is about that far as you see before you. Of course, moving back is pretty much null at this point. It mostly relies on the ball joint to move that far back. So, and then the right arm, I don't know what it is, but that's as far back as it can kind of move. And then moving forwards, you have a little bit of that, but you can kind of even hear, I don't know if it's coming well on the mic, but you can hear almost like the arm is fighting with the cape. The arm is actually fighting with the cape in the sense that I'm trying to move it as high up as it can, and it's starting to kind of not necessarily separate, but really stress itself against the cape up here on this part. So moving the arms upwards is not exactly very, very favored on this guy. And then when you move it down, some of that cape piece, some of the molding of the cape is kind of left up here because of how it's kind of molded that way and it's kind of flexing that way, so it takes a while for it to kind of fall back down into and to kind of flush with the arm to give it that look like it's rested. So yeah, a little bit of a hindrance there, but hey, like I said, I wasn't even thinking about getting this figure, so it's lucky that I even have movement overall. Then you do have bicep swivels to kind of allow horizontal movement of the arm, as you see a little bit there, but it is kind of rigid, and do not so much the cape, but rather just the way that the arms are molded and the way that the overall arm is kind of stayed in that position because of that cape. It's a little limited. It's just a little limited, but it can happen, and I could push it a little farther, but it's already starting to give me a little bit of resistance, so I'm not even going to try it. You do have two joints at the elbow that could flex about that far in, as well as, of course, that wrist joint, that wrist ball joint that allows movement horizontally 360 degrees, as well as being able to incline inside about that far in and then that far out. And then moving on to the torso, you do have some two dividends right here at the waist and as well as the mid torso area. Also kind of rigid. That's probably as far as I can really give it before I start to feel a little bit of resistance. So there is some twisting there, and it's meant to be realistic twisting because that's as much as a human body can take before it ends up in the Saw movies. But then you move on down to the top part of the legs right here. And one of my viewers, shout out to whoever posted this in one of my other McFarlane Toy reviews, it brought to my attention that up until this point, McFarlane has not developed any figures with thigh cuts. It would actually be greatly appreciated, McFarlane, if you guys can kind of, throw that in, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That'll be extra dope. But for the time being, we only have ball joints here at the top of the leg that allow movement about that far outwards to the front, that far back, before you start to see a little bit of a cutout right here on the leg, ruining the illusion of the rubber piece that's making up the penny part. And then you can move the leg outwards about that far. That's actually rather far for this kind of figure, as well as slight horizontal swivel movement about that much outwards and then that much inwards. And then of course two joints at the knee that allow bending about that far back. That is ratcheted, so it does kind of keep in place as far as posing is concerned. And then moving down, you of course got the ankle ball joint that allows movement up and then down like so, as well as pivoting outwards and then inwards like so. There you go. And then you cannot forget the toesies. So pretty straightforward with the postability as well as design. Make no mistake, guess what the accessories are? Pretty straightforward. First and foremost, we have, of course, a Batarang, and it is as simple as they may come because it's almost not even that much of a Batarang. The only reason why you know it's the Batarang is because of course, the wing cutouts at the bottom and the little divots at the top to then symbolize a Bat-arang. Other than that, it really is a very simple slab of plastic. But hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then outside of that, of course, you have his grapple gun. And I will give them props for not only just making the grapple gun, but also kind of giving it a little bit of a stylistic twist by having the actual grapple be ejected and coiling about there in the middle portion of the accessory. Now, of course, this could potentially be prone to breaking in the future considering how extensive it is, but again, it adds personality while still maintaining the simplistic nature of the overall figure and design, especially because of the way that not only the gun itself is designed, but also the grapple itself. It's just a little ball piece there with the two wings added to it, and it just fits. It fits the figure, it fits the overall tone that we're kind of going for here, and simply put, it's just a very straight to the point Batman that is just meant to just kick ass and deliver justice. And it's because of those factors that from time to time, I do think to myself, why did I buy this guy? He's not affiliated with any other property that's Batman related that I love, like the Arkham games or the movies or any other thing or storyline that I'm directly affiliated with as far as Batman is concerned. I don't even read that many comics, so I'm not very familiarized with the overall story of Detective Comics number 1000. Yet, sometimes that's kind of the point, I feel, is that being that he's not connected to any existing property that I've kind of grown up with or fell in love with and had a certain standard or expectation for in figure form, it kind of feels refreshing to buy a Batman figure simply because he's Batman and he's got his own style, his own taste, his own thing going for him. And because of that, he feels very welcome into the collection. And on top of that, he does have his things, his qualities that makes him a worthwhile addition, especially the way that the head joint feels amongst its movement, to the little detail of the graded kind of armor part on the sides of his costume, kind of giving it a sense of gravitas to the costume and make it feel simple yet very effective to what Batman is. And on top of that, just being a very straightforward Batman figure that I like the look of it. It was on discount, and I figured, you know what the hell, let's broaden the McFarlane Toys collection. If you guys do have the DC or Detective Comics number 1000 McFarlane Toys Batman, let me know in the comments if you guys enjoy it, if you like it being a part of your collection, and what's your favorite underrated Batman figure that nobody else really talks about. Let me know in the comments. Make sure to check out this other video showing up on screen for more Batman or Spider-Man goodness, and until next time guys, stay humble.